Hey, Montel Williams here. Look, I've got some incredible news to share with you. I want to tell you about my brand new book that's coming out that's called The Sailing of the Intrepid. Now, this book is more than just an historical account. It's a tribute to the brave men who served aboard the USS Intrepid and a celebration of their extraordinary legacy. Writing this book was such an incredible story, and I'm really thrilled to be able to share it with you. So don't wait to grab your little piece of history. The book is available right now to order. You can go to montelmedia.com, and you can even get a limited autograph signed copy. Now, thank you so much for your support. I can't wait for you to read this incredible story of the sailing of the Intrepid. I'll see you on the pages. Well, welcome back to Let's Be Blunt with Montel. I'm your host, Montel Williams, and today we have a true pioneer in the medical cannabis movement, someone whose work has shaped policy and changed lives for over 2 decades. Steph Sherer is a founder, board president, and executive director of Americans for Safe Access. Steph has been at the forefront of the fight for patients' rights, pushing for safe, legal, and dignified access to cannabis-based medicine, not just here in the United States, but around the world. From the halls of Congress to the World Health Organization, she's been a very powerful voice for patients. Steph, it's an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Montel. It's really good to see you.
Absolutely. As we said before we even came on, it's good to see you again. So we'll talk about that later on. But let's start with some basics for anyone who might not be familiar. You founded Americans for Safe Access back in 2002. Take us back to that time, what the landscape was like, and what inspired you to create ASA.
Well, I was a cocky 25-year-old back then who became a patient. My neurologist brought it up to me as a potential solution to anti-inflammatories that wouldn't damage my kidneys. I was having kidney issues. And there were actually 11 dispensaries in the whole country. They were mostly in the Bay Area of California. And 8 states had criminal exemption laws. So basically, if you were arrested and you had a letter from your doctor, you could take it to the judge and maybe get the charges dropped. But there was no access, nothing like that. So one day my neurologist closed the door behind him, and this little 80-year-old man asked me if I smoked pot. And I told him I didn't. And he asked me if I knew where to get some. And I think I just stared at him and I was like, am I your youngest patient? Because I thought he was trying to score weed from me. I was like, what is happening here? Right? He's like, no. He said, he's like, I don't know anything about this. I'm just going to tell you that, but we're running out of options. You're about 6 months out of dialysis if we stay on this treatment. And so if you can find some, I think you have to try it. So I was living in San Diego at the time, my early 20s. And I literally just called up friends that listened to reggae music. I was like, hey, do you smoke weed? And that's how I had my first access to medical cannabis. And as a political advocate, I liked taking on problems. And I'd never worked on an issue that had 80% support nationwide before. And I was like, this will be a piece of cake. Let's make national access.
Yeah, that's 2002, and we still see we're fighting today. It's very interesting we explain that, because that's the exact same story I could say back to you. I mean, I literally, because my diagnosis with MS came literally in 1999, officially in 2000, I went through probably the exact same formulary that you went through. I mean, I was thrown on every set that there is, from Percocet to Ultraset to Vicodin to there was no oxycodone back then. There was Towlin back then. So I was taking everything under the sun, to the point that at one point in time I was pumping probably, I can't remember the exact number, but it was between 11 and 12, 11 and 14 Vicodin a day, which was really insane. I was also doctor shopping, and it just happened that my primary doctor for MS was at Harvard. I won't give out his name, but he, at the same time did the exact same thing. He wasn't, that old. He wasn't, as a matter of fact, I think I was older than him, but he was like, have you ever heard of cannabis? Because dude, if you stay on these, they didn't say opioids. If you stay on what I got you on right now, it's going to be tough. And at the time I was having some really, really, really bad digestive issues, like most people go through. And some of my side effects. I literally I could take a Vicodin and drool in the corner, but it didn't do anything for pain. So, that's what really started me down the path. And so once, I tried it again, and I had used cannabis when I was a kid. It was not like I was, unfamiliar with it, but didn't understand and lived what no one understood back then in 2002, 2003, the amount of research that had already been done by Dr. Meshulam in Israel, the amount of research that the American, that we paid for in Israel and around the world that proved that, cannabis was a good efficacious agent for neuropathic pain, for ischemic issues, for other things. And that's what actually prompted, and I'm speaking to the choir, this, but that's what prompted the U.S. government to go ahead and issue themselves a patent back in 2002 for cannabis and cannabinoids. So, yeah, I remember that, and just like you, it started your advocacy. It started mine also because literally from that point on, I literally marched around the country trying to speak in before as many state legislatures as I could to get access for patients who had the same issues that I had. So very admirable, and now you've come a long, long way, as they say, baby. Right? You've come a long way. ACE has grown into the nation's largest patient advocacy organization. What do you see as some of the most significant achievements that you've accomplished over the last 20 years?
It's such an odd time because on one hand, we created a strategic plan back in 2002, and honestly, we've just been sort of checking off the boxes since then. So, I didn't come from the cannabis space, and when I started researching, why can't I get this medicine anywhere, and really started understanding that the people that were providing medicine in these 11 dispensaries were committing federal civil disobediences, right? Really wrapping my mind around that. I came across a denial of a petition from the DEA to reschedule cannabis. And a lot of the people I knew in the cannabis space were talking about this document with all this propaganda in it. And I was like, are you talking about this document that denies cannabis as the rescheduling of it? Because what was in that document, of course, there was, some crazy theories about gateway use and all of that. But it also said, there's no product safety protocols for the supply chain. It said that we can't identify the constituent components. And it's, talked a lot about the UN drug treaties. And so to me, that was a blueprint. Like, this is literally the DEA saying these are the problems with, having access.
And
And
if not me to cut you off, but just for folks at home, because I love to educate as we go along.
yeah,
Let's
yeah.
talk a little bit about that UN drug treaty. That UN drug treaty was what 1962 or 63? You
So the
remember?
first version, yeah, was 61, and
61. There you go. That's right. And that was to not allow the inter country commerce of hemp or any hemp products, right?
well, it was actually so the international drug treaties was basically something that all countries signed on to through the UN that basically required them to create the Controlled Substance Act in their own country. So, there's a horrible man in cannabis history named Anslinger,
Of course.
um, who was a racist, horrible person, who just hated cannabis so much. And when he left his position as head of what is now the DEA, he actually started working internationally to get this drug treaty passed
And
because
people need to know that Anslinger was the guy who actually formulated the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act. And he did so after he lost his job as the head of alcohol prohibition. When they went ahead and did away with alcohol prohibition, he needed a job. So he reached out to William Randolph Hearst and Charles DuPont, and they funded almost all of his efforts to get that 1937 Tax Act passed, which was then literally refuted by, I think, the entire medical community around America. Yet that homeboy worked for what, another then 40 years, almost 40 years, to continue his assault on a plant. And, I think you nailed it. And very few people will jump right out there and admit the fact that how racist this was in the beginning. This had really less to do with drug awareness. And as a matter of fact, even while he was the prohibitionist that he was for alcohol, he used to speak on the fact that cannabis was a better choice for people because you never see anybody committing crimes. He used to speak at. There are speeches
Oh,
that he
interesting.
said.
I've never heard that. That's
Yeah,
actually great. Yeah.
dig him up. You'll find it.
Yeah, I'll look for that because the on the technical on the policy side of things, the reason that they moved forward with the Tax Act was because the way that our Constitution is written, the federal government wasn't supposed to have that much power, right? And so something like the Controlled Substance Act was like, no way, you cannot tell states what to do. And so the only thing that they could think of was tax it out of existence, right? So it was something like $100 per dollar value. And so this man, Enslinger, actually had to go and create an international drug treaty that the United States signed on to that would circumvent our federalism, so that we could have something as overreaching and intrusive into our state governments as the Controlled Substance Act. So we signed on as a government in 1968 and then passed the Controlled Substance Act.
And we should let everybody know that since the last 4 or 5 years, over 150 countries have pulled out of that treaty. Correct? Because now that's the reason why we have cannabis or hemp being sold around the world.
Well, hemp, they've removed hemp from the definitions of that treaty. So the 160 countries that you're talking about, they signed on to say, let's take hemp out. So hemp is no longer in that drug treaty. And so it's a separate definition. We were a little late to the game with the definition of hemp. And what we do see, though, is that, just like any other treaty at the UN level, the larger governments can do whatever they want, right? They don't have to care if they sign on or if they're breaking that treaty. But really, the more impoverished countries, really have to meet those requirements, or it can affect how people trade or do business with those countries. But we do have 60 countries now that have passed medical cannabis laws. The United States is not one of them, and we basically through WHO and through other means, that there's actually protocols for a country to create a medical cannabis program, which hopefully we'll do one day.
Hopefully, we will do one day. Well, that's incredible work that you guys have done. I mean, I would venture to say that you've been responsible for the majority of the passages of medical cannabis around the country, have you not? I mean, you've been involved in almost every single one of them.
Yeah, we definitely have been a part of, I'm an organizer, and I know a lot of people don't know or appreciate what that means, but I love empowering patients to represent themselves. So a lot of the work that we've done over the years is, when patients contacted us, saying that they, needed access, we taught them how to legislate, how to do citizen lobbying, how to talk to the press, how to do political strategy. And we definitely were one of the people inviting you around the country to come speak. But there's always been so much confusion around medical cannabis because we have been used as a tactic for people with other interests. And so, what I found most interesting is really having to define what it is to have a medical cannabis state. Like you can't just pass a law and then just say you're a medical cannabis state. You actually have to make sure that patients have medical cannabis, was a major part of that definition. But I think what's even more surprising to me today is that people think that the state programs were the goal, when really those state programs were a strategy to get, they were triage. Let's get patients off the battlefield of the war on drugs so we can tackle some of these things the DEA has said that we have to do. And honestly, I didn't think it was going to take that long, but it took us 15 years to change the scheduling in the UN drug treaties, which only happened in December 2020. And what happened right after that? HHS and FDA said that there is currently accepted medical use in cannabis in the United States.
But even having said that, now all the work that you've done has been incredible. But now let's shift a little bit to the topic that's causing a lot of concern right now. There's new proposed hemp regulations that have gone into place. There's language in the fiscal 2026 minibus bill that could just drastically change the industry forever if it stays in place. Can you break down what some of these changes are and what they mean?
Yeah. So in 2018, in the Farm Bill, which takes care of all of our food and agriculture, um, there was actually a change that created a space for legal hemp. So it was meant for agricultural products, for foodstuffs, um, and at the same time, a lot of people were looking for access to CBD. It just happened to happen at the same time. And over the last 7 years, there have been a lot of interesting interpretations of what the Farm Bill, the Hemp Bill made legal. And there have been, state governments have tried to regulate products coming out of these markets. And people have just been waiting for the FDA to step in and maybe regulate them. Um, the FDA has said that they cannot. So what just happened was a loophole was closed. So basically what the Congress did is they defined what is industrial hemp. So they really define like what are the foodstuffs, textiles, all the different pieces, everything that you can utilize to make clothes and plastics. And then they created another definition, which is hemp derived cannabinoid products. And so within those definitions, they also clarified what they meant by under 0.3% THC, which is, by the way, the global definition for hemp is that it's products and plants from this species, of varieties of that plant that have under 0.3% THC.
Which is an arbitrary number that somebody just pulled out of the air anyway, right?
Yes, for decades, right? And globally, and these are huge markets that have nothing to do with cannabinoids at all, right? Hemp seed is an amazing nutritional product. You get your omega-3s, omega-6s in there, protein. And until 2018, we had to import that foodstuffs from Canada because farmers were not allowed to grow that. So just as we've had this long battle for access to medical cannabis, there's been this other battle happening that we've sort of intertwined with around farmers wanting to produce hemp as an agricultural commodity. So because of lack of access, there's a lot of creative companies that started, interpreting these protections for CBD with a little bit of THC. And then nobody was arrested, nothing happened. So then it was CBD with a lot of THC. And then we started seeing synthetic products and all sorts of things trying to tie themselves to that definition, including intoxicating hemp products that we were seeing sold next to alcohol. And what was really sort of the pin in the coffin for these products was that states were not able to regulate them because of this federal protection. And so as this year, as Congress was looking at this, there were 39 attorneys general that called on Congress and said, we need you to do something about this, close this loophole. And so what they just passed closed the loophole. So now the only legal cannabinoid products have under 0.4%, under 4.4 milligrams of THC per container, whatever, and that's a whole other area that they defined. But it also made synthetic cannabinoids illegal. So all of these sort of Frankenstein cannabinoids that we've been seeing pop up, those will have to go off the market. They created definitions for the different containers, but not necessarily the doses, which they've asked FDA to do. So these laws, I mean, they modified the law. So it's not just appropriations. This isn't going to reset in a year. This is law, and it will, they'll start enforcing it in, they said 365 days, which is now November 11th, 2026.
Which is really insane in some ways, because I don't think the industry really, really recognizes, because I think a lot of people are saying, well, they can go and do that all they want. However, I know that President Trump is thinking about changing this to Schedule 3, which people don't understand the Pandora's box that's going to open up if that happens. Because they changed the schedule from what it is now to Schedule 3. That's not as, be careful what you wish for. Because what does that do? That falls directly under the FDA, a group of people who have never, ever, ever wanted hemp to be legal, wanted cannabis to be legal. So now it falls under people who can't stand the product to then police. So they could basically step in and say, you know what? Anything that's on a shelf in any dispensary around America isn't illegal until we actually approve each individual SKU. So just the same way as we have a government right now that's sending the National Guard onto the streets to find anybody of any brown complexion darker than a grocery bag, they could walk into any dispensary in America and take their guns and completely destroy all the products that's in there if they chose to.
Yep. No, and thanks for bringing that up, because I think right now, we're dealing with sort of an emergency at Americans for Safe Access, which is always the patients, right? There are millions of patients who actually stopped trying to improve their medical cannabis laws at the state level when hemp became legal, because they could just buy it online. They weren't. There were a lot of issues as far as safety of those products and the fact that they weren't regulated in that way. But there's also millions of people who have been using CBD and other cannabinoid products who have no idea that it's medical cannabis, that it's the same thing. They have no idea that it was ever in question. And so, those patients I'm very worried about. And so we're looking at strategies at the state level, emergency regulations that would incentivize people who have cannabis licenses to produce high CBD products again, which have really been driven out of the market because, especially in adult use markets. We're also looking at, we're going to be doing some educational courses just about like shelf life of these products. I don't want people hoarding, like buying up, they're using their life savings to buy a bunch of these products when in fact they don't stay the medicine that they need for a long period of time. But I think what this really shines a light on is that when HHS and FDA said that there is in fact currently accepted medical use of cannabis, what that did is it actually, for us, it closed Act 1 of this big fight that we've been in, right? None of the schedules are going to work for cannabis, but what we really wanted was that recognition. And now Act 2 should be, how do we get this to patients? And so a lot of cannabis advocates, they really understand the history of prohibition, but there's another issue that medical cannabis faces, and that is the way that this country deals with botanical medicines. There currently is not a pathway forward for a botanical medicine, for a complex botanical. And so it's very dishonest when the FDA points cannabis manufacturers to the botanical drug development approval process, because even in that document, they say this is not appropriate for complex botanicals. And so that, the next steps and really how we're going to succeed to get safe access for all Americans is going to be by changing the definition of medicine in this country. Medicine does not equal FDA approved. The FDA is a consumer protection agency that got its powers to decide whether or not something was medicine under its powers to validate labels. So if you say this is going to cure your headache, they had the power to really look and see if that product gets rid of your headache. But what they didn't have the mandate to do is figure out what is the best medicine, right? So going
And that's
all the way
what
back
they
to
think they have. That's
sorry.
what they think they have. Is the power.
Exactly, and it's super dangerous, right? And think about, Montel, what this has done for how we in the West view medicine, right? Food is medicine. Remember that old adage? Like that is the heart of the founding of Western medicine, and we've gotten away from that idea, and we've become crisis medicine. So if something's broken, fix it, give it a pill, right? And what is so exciting about medical cannabis as a medicine is that it impacts your endocannabinoid system, right? It's literally involved with every part of your body, which also has a lot to do with digestion, sleep, all these other sort of building blocks of life. And if we're going to move into a era of medicine where doctors are treating the whole patient, right, where we're looking at endocannabinoid health, which isn't just cannabis, it's also nutrition, access to good food, it's exercise, it's all of these components to battle these complex chronic diseases that honestly, they still don't actually know what they are. But what we do know is that throwing a bunch of pharmaceuticals at them isn't working.
But it's unfortunate, because I don't know. I don't know if you tell me if you see this in your travels around the country. I have noticed this is just. I can't say I've done a study. I haven't looked at 300,000 patients to figure out whether or not this is real or not. Try to do gold standard crap. But just general, just moving around America, 6, 7 years ago, No, more than that. 8 years ago, 9 years ago, somewhere around 214, 215. You know, I would attend national conferences and speak at national conferences, and I feel like 214, 213, 214, the industry had not left the patients on the battlefield. But around 216, the industry started leaving the patients on the battlefield. The industry started not giving a damn about the patients, giving a damn more about how I can become an MSO, how I can become a leader in doing exactly what Big Pharma has done for the last 70 years, and that's take advantage of those who are sick, use their backs to be a stepping stone to those who want to do other things.
We
And,
know
and
there's something very significant about that timeline than the dates that you just mentioned. But I think if you look at what is just happening with hemp, it's sort of a repeat of what you're talking about. And I've said probably 30 times this last week, you can't use a patient as a shield if you're not putting us out front.
correct.
And so this backlash that we're seeing in Congress around these products was that people got ahead of patients and they just started using us when things were going badly. And I don't know about you, but I'm done. Like you can't grab on me when you're falling in a black hole because I didn't ask you to create synthetic cannabinoids and put them in cookies and sell them to children. That was not part of my strategy. So 2014, we passed the CJS Appropriations Amendment. We stopped the federal raids. And once we stopped the raids and, cannabis businesses were no longer afraid of going to federal prison, they started talking about the business of business. They started talking about themselves, and patients weren't needed in those conversations.
Absolutely right, because I'm telling you, I've said this over and over again. This became a B2B business rather than a B2C business, which it should have been all along. This should have been businesses concerned about their consumer rather than going in and patting themselves on the back because they came up with a new extraction machine. I got sick of speaking at conferences where, I look out on the conference floor and there's maybe one booth talking about patient advocacy and there's 200 booths talking about buy my new widget so you can create, a higher THC level product. It completely I became, I shouldn't say now disenfranchised, no, but I disheartened. That's part of the reason why I do this Let's Be Blunt series, because I rather talk about the benefits of cannabis, what it does for patients, the reason why we actually, I say it all the time when I'm at a conference is that, how dare we now spit on the gurneys that were pushed out of houses in Northern California, people in gurneys with handcuffs on them.
Yep.
And we use that to make sure that we made this product available, but then we turned away from it. Now it's trying to figure out how can we still. I mean, I'm blown away at even just 2025, and we got more and more places around the country trying to figure out how high a THC they can put in something, rather than how do we treat the patient. It's the same way the what is it the Shackler family, what was his name? The family who created oxycodone and then started, upping the doses, upping the doses, upping the doses, upping the doses, knowing that they were addicting America. This is the same thing that this industry, who claimed to be so patient centric years ago, has turned into.
Well, I think, yeah, I definitely have spent a lot of time in that space that you're describing. And, I definitely go through waves of anger and frustration. But honestly, I don't really go to industry conferences anymore because I'm not mad anymore. I just realized that those businesses, they're not actually going to be around. I'm sorry to say this, but the other sort of reality of where we are today around cannabis has nothing to do with the successes of the businesses. This is something I say to advocates all the time. Don't confuse where we are as a movement as far as proving the medical value of cannabis with how the stock market is, because we're killing it, right? We have 60 countries that have medical cannabis programs. HHS and FDA have created.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, we're killing it. So the idea that because these MSOs aren't making as much money as they would like to, is not the same thing. And so I think, coming back to the hemp legislation that we're talking about right now, the um, This is happening because at the end of the day, when companies were sitting down with Congress to talk about these products, sorry, I have somebody coming in. Um,
Okay.
Thanks, Diana.
That was funny. That was cool.
That was really cute. But because, you know, at the end of the day, these companies that were talking about how they were providing this medication for patients, when they were sitting, at the table with Senate trying to figure out, what was going to be allowed in these products, they held their heels in for intoxicating hemp. And they at no point did they say, you know what, let's just make sure patients are covered and then we'll continue to negotiate and figure this out later. They said all or nothing. And so what they got was nothing. And so for patient advocates, it's really hard to get real news about cannabis. And a lot of cannabis advocates are really in cannabis bubbles, right? Like they're so surprised when people don't know everything that's happening in Congress, or don't understand certain definitions. But 90% of this country agrees with us, right? But they don't understand all the jargon and all of these little,
It,
nuances.
and you're nailing it, because I think that's the responsibility of this industry. I'm so sorry. I've said it for the last, and I'll continue to say it until I see a change. Education, education, education is as important to medical cannabis as location, location, location is to real estate. If without it, we do nothing. If we don't do our job in educating the consumer, this industry goes away and goes back underground. We go back into a world where we have products that are tainted with all kinds of, deleterious bullshit, from heavy metals to you name it, to pesticides to you name it. We go back to a black market. I mean, look, we just realized that this year we're probably going to see the legal cannabis market break 32 to 33 billion dollars. But we know for a fact that the illegal market will be at least 3 times as high. So the illegal market is going to be around $100 billion. $130 billion is a game changer. We know that last year, the cannabis industry created, well, that was the first time that the jobs started trickling down in 2024, but 2023, we were creating more jobs in the cannabis industry than any other industry in America. We were selling more product than milk. Milk. Come on, milk is served on every breakfast table in America. We're selling more cannabis than milk, more cannabis than energy drinks. And we can't come together for a second and say, now it's time for us to get back to, it's been time for us to get back to where we started. And that was providing information to the consumer, whether I'm in a adult state or not. Because I still believe that it doesn't matter whether or not you're a recreation, whatever that term means, recreation. I think that anybody who gravitates to cannabis rather than alcohol has a medical reason. They may not admit it, but it is. If they say that, oh, it makes me sleep better, medical reason. It says it makes me relax better when I come home from work, medical reason. It says it makes me feel more, less anxious, medical reason. So why does this industry, I just, it's like, Steph, I beg you, dear, look, I mean, let's figure out what we got to do. If you need, I'll put my big mouth out there anywhere you need me to try to convince this industry it's time for change. It's like, I don't know if you probably don't know this, but I just penned a deal with and signed on with the Brothers Grimm because, Dr. Soul and Miss Soul, they reached out to me and said, Montel, we know your advocacy, especially for patients. We'd love to create a seed for you. And I was like, if you create a seed for me, then I would definitely want a seed that is a medical seed, not some bullshit, recreational seed. I could care less if the rec industry doesn't gravitate to the seeds. So what I do, I pull together Blue Dream and White Widow and try to go back to the earliest lineages of those that I could find. And Dr. Soul did that by researching, finding them, finding 2 of their earlier plants from around 2000, 2000, and put those 2 together. We just actually got the seeds, and they're going to be made available here at the end of the month for anybody who wants them. But it's a product that's not this. It'll probably end up, somewhere between 18 and 23, 24% THC, if that. It's going to have a cannabinoid profile that I think is going to blow this industry out the door because, I still have not heard the exact true number of cannabinoids, but I bet it's going to be somewhere in that, 250, 200. And from a terpene profile, I think it'll be unmatched. And unmatched in a sense that it's going to provide that anti-inflammatory ability for people who have neuropathic pain. That's what I suffer from. That's what I look for. Way back, I'll never forget back, in 2000, 2001, 2002, when I first started shifting over, it was 2002 when the doctor told me shift. I literally flew out to San Francisco in the Bay Area, found one of the dispensaries that was operating out there, sat down and spoke with them. And the dispensary owner said, "Oh, look, I got all this CBD shit. We can't even sell it. You want it? I'll give it to you." So I shifted over from being a flower smoker to a kief smoker because I was getting literally ounces of CBD rich cannabinoid or CBD rich kief. Go ahead and just get it for free. $10, boom, get an ounce. So it's time for us to get back to not. This. I'm preaching to the choir, but as an industry, this industry's got to get back to the basics, and start reminding patients why this is so important. And especially since we know now that the demographic in America with the most disposable income that is literally walking into dispensaries buying the most product are the baby boomers, because the ailments that we have as baby boomers are ailments that are settled by cannabis, and we need to start educating that generation, and they're the ones who have been changing the laws for us anyway. So it's about time that we got back to the basics and start educating them again. I'm sorry, I'll preach for days.
Yeah, no. I like a soapbox whenever I can hear one, but I think that you know, I but what there some ideas I just kind of want to float out there. One is, I don't use the term industry. I see cannabis as a commodity that I'd like to be used in other industries. Like I want to see cannabis utilized in healthcare industry. And I think some of this idea that cannabis is this separate industry is creating some protectionism that is making it hard for people to evolve. And definitely, you have a lot of protectionism. That's if cannabis is legal, FedEx and UPS are pretty good at delivering things, right? So some of that thought is kind of keeping us stuck and really benefiting from other parts of the business community in the United States. But I also think, I catch myself saying this often, especially now that I've come back to the US, is that, people in this country often confuse capitalism with conspiracy theories, and especially in medicine, right? Like we have a for-profit healthcare system. Some of these, like the way that people approach bringing products to patients is based on a for-profit model. And I think, unless I want to change the name of our organization to Privileged Americans for Safe Access, we still have a way to go to make sure that this is an option for all patients. And, looking at like us going back to a time in history, and looking at sort of who is the current cannabis industry, I think a lot of that is about to shake up. And so I just want to, I mean, I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but I want to just like throw some reality, on people that, cannabis is in Project 2025, right? Like going in and actually, overriding state and local laws to enforce federal law was mentioned in several places in Project 2025. And while people were really caught up in this sort of hemp debate, a couple things happened that are pretty alarming, that show that there could be a crackdown coming. And I don't think we're going to see the raids like you and I saw, Montel, back in the day. I think that we kind of blew that strategy out of the water every time there was a raid. We had a press conference that the DEA was holding for us. But on the 29th of September, there was a memo that went out from the Department of Justice to U.S. attorneys telling them to prosecute any cannabis use on federal lands, including national parks. Now, that's always been the case that they could do that, right? But they just haven't. But it was a memo that's actually prioritizing prosecuting for possession, individual possession, which is specifically what they talk about in Project 2025. And then also, right before the shutdown happened, there was an oversight hearing in Congress that brought the narcotics officer, head of narcotics from the state of Oklahoma, into this oversight hearing for investigations, and sort of talking about cannabis grows that are run by the Chinese, and all that sounds kind of crazy, conspiracy theorist ideas, but what they were testifying is that there are all these illegal Chinese grows that are hiding behind cannabis grows, and they're using the proceeds to fund the Communist Party of China. Now, I would just kind of blow that off and roll my eyes, except for the other witness that testified at that hearing was from the Heritage Foundation. And at the conclusion of that hearing, they asked for a task force, a RICO task force, to be created to investigate cannabis. And so we have to remember, adult use is not legal in any way. There's nothing protecting. If tomorrow Trump said, "I want to start enforcing federal cannabis laws," he can. Like, there's nothing stopping.
When you said, we remember the day when there were the raids and those things, and maybe that won't come back. I'm going to say I'm not necessarily sure you're right when you say that, because just the same way as right now in North Carolina, getting ready to happen in New Orleans, these raids that are happening right before our eyes. I'm going to tell you, I think a lot of this supposed looking for illegal aliens and looking for violent aliens, I think is just a way to set the stage to allow the federal government to federalize our National Guard in a way that it's not been done before. And when we do it so many times that it happens every other day and you see it on the news, you get used to it, you don't care. So when you see it next week going into 20 dispensaries in Boston, or 20 dispensaries in Maryland, or 20 dispensaries in, wherever, and them literally taking their gun barrels and busting up and destroying product on the floor. The first day, he goes, "Oh, that's not right. That's not right. They did it." By the fifth time, people are just going to go, "Oh, here, that's what we have. Well, that's what the law says."
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And it's almost like a litmus test, right? They're seeing what the reaction will be, right? And so what's interesting is I think that the Heritage Foundation folks maybe don't really understand the power of the Controlled Substance Act and how intrusive it can be. And so they, throughout Project 2025, they talk about RICO a lot, right? Is the only way that they know how you can have federal powers to go into states. But something else that's just right around the corner is that again, nobody is talking about in the cannabis space, is that the only thing protecting medical cannabis from federal enforcement is an amendment to the DOJ budget, which is a CJS appropriation. Some people call it Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment. But we passed that in 2014. You came out a few times, Montel, and helped us with that. But that law, it just says the Department of Justice cannot go into states and it lists all of the medical cannabis states. And we've been able to pass that every year with every budget. We pass it every time. But last year, and then again this year in the appropriations process, our opponents actually amended our amendment. So offensive, but they amended our amendment, and they said, except for cannabis businesses that are operating within USC 860 zones. So USC 860 it was an 80s addition to the drug war. It's all the drug-free zones. Those signs you see around schools, and in the state cannabis programs, we did include parameters around schools for licensing of dispensaries and cultivation licenses. But the federal version is much broader. So it's not just schools, it's also federally subsidized housing, it's colleges, it's swimming pools, it's parks. It even includes video arcades because it was written in the 80s. And so any cannabis business, whether you have a medical license or adult use license, if you are in that parameter, what they're asking for is permission to prosecute you. And what else is the kicker about these zones is that it's double the penalties. So if you've worked on licensing at all in the cannabis space, it is almost impossible to find a location that's 1,000 foot from a school. Now add all of those other provisions.
I mean,
right?
Steph, come on now. What are we going to do? I'm almost like, what are we going to do, darling?
What here's what we're gonna do is that we've got to go back to old school organizing.
There you go.
Sorry, but like posting something on Facebook is the very least little you can do. And if you want to save your access to medical cannabis, you've got to start getting out from behind the computer. We've actually created all these resources at ASA. You got to start writing letters to the editor again. Most people actually decide their political positions, like 60%, from reading the editorial page. So there are all of these stories that just happened around hemp. Less than 10% of them mention patients. So just write a letter to the editor. You wrote this story about these hemp products. You didn't mention the fact that now all of these patients aren't going to have access. You don't have to be an expert. We've also created all of these printer friendly signs. So they're like 8.5 by 11. I'm not going to take up all your ink, but you print them up. They have QR codes, and we've got to start organizing. Print them up and say, hey, patients, you're about to lose your access, and put them up at dispensaries, but also in, on your school campus. Put them in the laundry room, wherever you do your laundry. Put them up at the grocery store. And remember, we have 90% of the public agrees with us. Nobody knows there's a problem.
Give out some stats so that people, if they want to reach out to your organization, where do they go?
So safeaccessnow.org is our website. And we have all sorts of campaigns that people can get involved in. But I would just say, if you don't do something now, that you're going to be telling your grandkids about this crazy time in history when cannabis was legal for a minute, and it's that serious. So
Illegal for a minute. You're right, and then we're going to go back to illegal and back to underground and then back to black market and gray market. Where, because I mean, I don't believe that even the Heritage Foundation or that the 2025 thing is going to do away with cannabis, but it's going to push it back underground. There's no ifs, ands, buts, and we'll go through another 50, 60-year-old people, because I can tell you, there's when we go back to the original, and I say this, and people look at me like I'm crazy, but the fact that we legalized and took a tool of imprisonment away from a group that wanted to use that to make sure that brown and black people stayed in jail, I called it the re-enslavement tool,
yep,
because whether slavery happens with chains in a field or chains in a cell, it's the same thing. The
100%.
fact that this was taken away, a tool was taken away, this has pissed off a lot of people. And those people are trying their best to get those tools back because, they created for-profit prisons around America, and those prisons are losing money right now.
You know what's interesting, Montel, is that coming back to the U.S., there's another industry that's made up a lot of those same players. That's the addiction industrial complex,
Right,
and they have beds they have to fill, and they've
right.
made up this cannabis use disorder craziness, right, to fill those beds. Um, but you're to be honest, when I became a medical cannabis patient, let's face it, I'm a little white girl in San Diego. Whether I got arrested as an activist only when I wanted to, right? Like I could have had access to cannabis, right? But when I realized, when I kind of went through the process, it's like, well, how do other people get access? 1 in 100,000 Americans can't metabolize anti-inflammatories, just like me. Not everyone has a friend who listens to reggae, right? That's why I created Americans for Safe Access, because it's about something bigger than me. Cannabis isn't going to go anywhere. It's a plant. If you're privileged or know the right people, you're always going to be able to get it. But that's not what the fight for safe access is about. It's not about some people getting the coolest tools and the best toys. It's about fundamentally changing how this country approaches medicine. And until everyone has safe access, we haven't done our job.
Correct. Well, not a job. Look, Steph, I'm sorry, we're running out of time.
Yeah, no, it's great to see you.
I need to have you back. I need to have you back. Do you hear me? I mean, because I barely got through 3 questions with you. We could talk for 2 or 3. You said love the soapbox. I love them too. So we could talk for hours and hours and hours. So I'd love to have you back, and I'm talking soon.
Yeah, anytime, anytime,
Okay.
anytime.
Let's do it again, please. Okay. And thank you so much
Absolutely.
for all the hard work that you're doing. Thank you for educating. Thank you for speaking out. Thank you for letting us know and remember that this all began because of a group of patients. Let's remember there was a period of time in this country when a former president, the first Bush, decided that, yes, you know what? Cannabis does work. It actually, allowed what was it? Back then I think it was 20 something patients. Now there's only 3 of those still that survive that had a get out of jail card for cannabis. But they recognize it because we were funding the research. People don't understand. We funded some of that research that Meshulam did in Israel. And we came up with the fact that we identified our endocannabinoid system, something that a lot of people don't even want taught because validates the fact that cannabis is part of what we as mammals need. So please, I'd love to have you back sometime.
Anytime. And if I could just leave you with this one thing to tell everybody, and that is, yes, it's been a long road. Trust me, 23 years I've been doing this. It's a long road. But what happens in the next 3 months, 6 months, and 2 years is going to impact how this moves forward. So if you haven't been an activist in a while, go get your sign out. If you haven't done anything yet, there's plenty for you to do.
Well, I'm ready to carry the sign right behind you, my dear. Okay, I'm up there. I'm up there right now. Okay, all right.
I love it.
Well, I'm going to have my people reach out to you and let's get this done. We need to talk more. We need to make sure people understand this conversation. Okay.
Fantastic.
Yes, ma'am. You be well, and for you, make sure you tune in to the next Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Thanks for joining me on Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback also, so please send us your comments. Military Makeover is so grateful for the support of Purple Heart Homes, a nonprofit organization that rebuilds and transforms the homes for our veterans.
Our heroes come home with sacrifices most of us can't imagine. As a veteran myself, I've been there and founded Purple Heart Homes to help.
When I tell the story of Purple Heart Homes, it's the freedom to not have to depend on somebody else to do the simple everyday things in life.
Visit phhusa.org/makeover to learn how you can help.